And joining us now for more on the economy is the executive director of the Groundwork Collaborative, Lindsay Owens. It's a think tank here in Washington that's been warning about the impact of Trump's economic policies. And Lindsay, Alex just laid it out for us, some of that big economic news today, specifically on GDP. We heard the White House, sometimes they blame the Trump or the Biden administration. Sometimes they say that this is the pain that consumers will need to feel in order to ultimately regrow and reshore some of these American industries that have been hurting for a long time. What was your reaction to the big economic news, that GDP number out earlier today?
Yeah, my reaction to today's news is that we are in real trouble. The economy has deteriorated considerably since Trump took office. It's really stunning when you take a look at it. And what we saw today is GDP shrunk. The economy got smaller in the first quarter of the year, and that is before any of the tariff announcements have been accounted for. The first quarter doesn't include the April Liberation Day tariff policies and the ensuing, chaos and economic deterioration that's followed. So I'm really worried. I've been worried about a recession for some time now. After today's numbers, I'm doubly worried. And I think the pain that we could be looking at for American families could be quite considerable. When we think about recessions, the effects are long-lasting. There are real scarring effects that stick with families and individuals for generations. People who lose their jobs or who graduate during recessions may never recover the same level of earnings as folks who graduated just prior or who held on to their jobs. So it's a really troubling sign for what's to come. I don't think the pain will be worth it. I think that's a pretty sort of unbelievably callous and cavalier thing for the administration to be saying right now. But Americans don't either. Overwhelmingly, Americans are very concerned with the economy right now. That's showing up in the consumer confidence data, that's showing up in the polling numbers, and that's showing up in the spending data, where you're starting to see Americans pull back on spending on a whole range of goods and services.
Another term you start to hear sort of thrown around a little bit more by economists is stagflation. What does that mean, and what could some of the potential impacts of that be?
Yeah, so if you think a recession is bad, get ready for stagflation. So this is when you get all of that slowing growth and that slowing demand that you see during a recessionary period, but you don't get any of the cooling prices that often accompany a recession. You would instead see continued high, sticky inflation. So, your wages will not be keeping up with prices, the pace of prices, and you won't get any relief in the pocketbook. So stagflation is very concerning for the economy, but also for American consumers.
And so let's say I'm someone watching this at home and I'm listening and thinking, wow, this all sounds really scary and bad. What can people actually do, or can they do anything to prepare to put themselves in the best position to sort of be ready for whatever the economy might hold in the coming months?
Yeah, look, I do think companies are already starting to pass along the price hikes as a result of Trump's tariffs, but some of them haven't hit yet. I think if you're looking to buy some essential items, we've recommended for expecting parents who need car seats or strollers or things like that, it really does make sense to make those purchases as soon as possible. We're already seeing price hikes there, but we may soon see shortages on some of those items. So for things that you really need to purchase, I think sooner is better than later. We're seeing some of that in the auto sector as well, where people have moved to go ahead and make car purchases ahead of the really big increased tariffs. So I think that's one thing that you can do to stay ahead of this.
And, we talk a lot about Wall Street, especially over the past few weeks, where we've seen so much volatility there. But what about Main Street and just those middle-class Americans? How much do they stand to lose, or how much will they be impacted versus some of the wealthier Americans who might have more money invested in their 401ks and whatnot?
Yeah, look, I mean, wealthier people may have more money in the stock market, but for those middle-class Americans who do have money in the stock market, it's typically because they're saving for their retirement. For folks on the eve of their retirement, they don't have time to weather the storm here. They don't have time to stave off huge losses in the stock market. So I think folks will be, really feeling this in a whole host of ways, not just the wealthy. Americans of lower incomes obviously spend more of their money as consumers, a disproportionate share of their incomes consuming essentials. As the price of those goes up, thanks to Trump's tariffs, it's going to hit them hardest. What we're really bracing for here is something that's quite regressive. We've got Congress working overtime this week to pass a bill that will offer tax breaks for the wealthiest Americans. And then we've got lower and middle class Americans bracing for impact thanks to price hikes from Trump's tariffs. So it's really the sort of worst possible scenario here where the wealthiest Americans are poised to get a payday from the tax breaks, and lower income Americans are going to feel the brunt of the tariffs. We also have the issue of Elon Musk's Doge, which has been working pretty hard to undermine the effectiveness of the administrative state. We've seen this already with delays at Social Security offices, for example. So one of my biggest concerns is that if a recession does hit, the administrative state and the federal government are not going to be in the strongest position to deliver benefits and safety net protections, whether that's food assistance or unemployment insurance, that Americans are really going to need and tend to rely on during downturns. So that's another thing to be thinking about in the weeks and months ahead.
All right, some important points there. Lindsay Owens, the Executive Director of the Groundwork Collaborative. Lindsay, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.